He paid her to clean the marble floors, not to cradle his children on them. But when he found her curled up on the cold tile, holding his twins through their nightmares like they were her own, something broke inside him. Something he didn't know was still there. Grayson Wolfe had built an empire from nothing but steel resolve, an Ivy League degree, and a complete disregard for things that couldn't be measured, like time, love, or grief. His Manhattan penthouse towered above the city like a fortress of silence, polished and sharp, just like its owner. Every morning, Grayson entered the same private elevator, rode past his own name engraved in brushed silver, and stepped into a space that echoed because he didn't allow music, or laughter, or warmth. That had died 2 years ago, with his wife. He hadn't touched the nursery since. He left that to others. Downstairs, past imported Persian rugs and white-on-white decor, was a woman no one noticed. Not really. Naomi, 31, quiet, graceful in a way that didn't belong to the world she cleaned. She kept her curly hair pulled back beneath a modest black wrap, her uniform neat, and her heart, well, locked away. She had learned the hard way that feelings weren't useful. Not when you were barely scraping by, not when you were black and invisible in a world built to overlook you, not when the people you loved had a way of vanishing without warning. So she kept her head down. Until the twins. 2-year-olds Bella and Ezra Wolfe were born into privilege and tragedy. Their mother, Elise, died shortly after childbirth. Naomi had arrived when they were 6 months old, originally to clean. But it wasn't long before Naomi noticed what no one else did. That the twins didn't cry for their father. They cried for anyone who stayed. "Miss Naomi?" Bella's tiny voice had trembled from the crib one night, just weeks after Naomi started. "Yes, sweet girl," Naomi's whisper had answered from the doorway. "I scared," Bella said. Ezra had already been whimpering. The room was dim, cold. The night nanny had fallen asleep in the lounge chair with earbuds in. Naomi stepped in, just for a moment, just to soothe them. She'd meant to leave once they were asleep. But the carpet was soft, and their little hands clung to her blouse, and it had been a long time since someone wanted her close. That night she stayed. Grayson never noticed, or pretended not to. He kept his distance, even from the twins, especially from them. His assistant, Ava, often hinted that it was time to engage. "They're not just tax write-offs, Grayson," she'd joke, but he'd shut her down with a glare. He couldn't be what they needed. He was too broken, too guilty. Elise had begged him to slow down, to be home more, to hold her when the pain became unbearable. But he'd had mergers to close, boardrooms to impress. He didn't hold her enough. And now there was nothing left to hold. On a cold Thursday in November, everything shifted. Grayson had arrived home unexpectedly early after cancelling a deal last minute, a rare thing. The board thought it was strategic. In truth, he'd just felt off, restless, like something was pulling him home. He walked past the doorman, through the marble lobby, nodded at no one, and entered the penthouse. Silence. The night nanny was nowhere in sight. He made his way to the nursery, almost by instinct. He hadn't stepped foot in it since the funeral. He pushed open the door and froze. There on the floor lay Naomi, curled protectively between both cribs. Bella's tiny hand was tangled in her shirt. Ezra's cheek rested against Naomi's shoulder. A faint glow from the nightlight bathed them in gold. Naomi's eyes were closed. She wasn't pretending. She was asleep. Tears stained Bella's cheeks, but she wasn't crying anymore. Neither was Grayson, not outwardly. But something inside him had cracked so loud, he felt it echo through his ribs. If you walked in and saw someone else comforting your child better than you ever had, would you be angry, or would you feel something else? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your gut reaction matters. Grayson stood in the doorway far longer than he should have. The room was quiet now, peaceful in a way he hadn't known peace in years. The soft hum of the nightlight, the even breaths of sleeping children, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of Naomi's chest. She had wrapped herself around them like instinct, as if they were hers. As if she knew the exact rhythm to match, the perfect temperature to keep them warm, the precise silence required to ease their cries. Grayson felt like an intruder in his own home. He didn't understand the feeling rising in his throat. It wasn't rage, wasn't jealousy. It was worse. It was shame. He walked away before she woke. The next morning, Naomi stirred with a stiff neck and an aching back. She stretched quietly, careful not to wake the twins, and began folding their little blankets. As she smoothed the last one, a voice stopped her cold. "Do you always sleep in here?" Naomi turned. Grayson stood by the door, sleeves rolled, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, still polished but less put together than usual. His eyes, though, were unreadable. She straightened. "Only when—" "They need it, sir." He looked past her, to the cribs. "And how often is that?" Naomi didn't want to answer, but she wouldn't lie. Often. A long silence stretched between them. Grayson stepped inside. "I saw you last night," he said. Naomi's throat tightened. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wolfe. The nanny had stepped out. They were crying, and I didn't mean to—" "I'm not reprimanding you." Naomi blinked. That was unexpected. Grayson ran a hand through his hair, frustrated, not with her, but with himself. "They don't cry with you, or if they do, you stay." She hesitated, then said softly, "Sometimes. That's all children need." He looked at her then, really looked, and what he saw wasn't just a maid. It wasn't even just a woman who loved children. It was someone who stayed, something he hadn't done, not when Elise asked him to, not when it mattered most. He nodded once. "Thank you." Naomi said nothing, but in her silence, something settled between them. Later that day, Ava cornered him in his office. "You look like someone just told you your stock's tanked." Grayson didn't look up from his screen. "I'm fine." Ava narrowed her eyes. "You're wearing yesterday's tie." He sighed. "Ava, not now." She leaned against the glass wall. Okay, but can I just say one thing? That maid, Naomi, I've seen her with the twins. She's not just help, Grayson. She's something else." Grayson stayed silent. Ava softened. "They cling to her like she's gravity." That night he sat at the edge of his bed, watching the city lights blink far below. His penthouse felt colder than usual, and all he could think about was Naomi on the nursery floor, holding his children like they were her world. Naomi, meanwhile, was trying to shake off the conversation. She didn't want complications. She didn't want kindness. The last time she'd let herself care like this, she'd lost everything. Her baby girl Jordan had only lived a few months, born too early. Naomi had held her through machines and prayers, then let her go with nothing left but a hospital bill and a hollow chest. Since then, Naomi didn't cradle babies, until Bella reached for her that first night. Something had cracked open, and every moment since had felt like both healing and reopening a wound. The next evening, Grayson asked to speak with her again, in the study this time. She stood across from him, nervous. His walls were lined with law books, modern art, and ambition. It felt like standing in a courtroom. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I'm hiring a new nanny, full-time." Naomi blinked. "Yes, sir. But not to replace you." She tilted her head. Grayson finally looked up. "I want you to stay, but not just to clean. I need someone they trust." Naomi's heart thudded in her chest. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I saw the way they look at you. That's not something money can buy." Naomi searched his face for mockery, pity, power. She found none. Just a man realizing, maybe for the first time, what mattered. At this point, what do you think he should do? Follow his pride or follow his heart? Tell us in the comments. Should Grayson keep his distance or finally show up for his children? Grayson hadn't planned to sit at the breakfast table. In fact, he rarely did. Meals were something the staff prepared for the twins and the nanny, and he usually took his own in his office, or not at all. But that morning, something compelled him to walk into the kitchen, pour his own coffee and sit. It startled Naomi. She had just set down Ezra's spoon and was wiping his chin with a gentle touch when she saw the shadow at the door. Her whole body tensed like a startled deer. Grayson felt it. The stiffness. The unspoken, "What are you doing here?" He sat anyway. Ezra babbled something incoherent and reached for his bottle. Bella clapped. Naomi didn't speak. She focused on the twins, acting as though he wasn't there. It stung more than he expected. He cleared his throat. "I'd like to be more involved." Naomi looked up slowly. "With the children?" "Yes." She nodded once. "Okay." Silence again. Thick, awkward. Naomi turned her attention back to Bella, who had yogurt on her nose. Grayson stood up before finishing his coffee. He couldn't take the weight of her quiet. He'd forgotten how much silence could say. That day, Naomi kept her distance. She kept to cleaning, cooking, tending to the twins. She made sure Grayson had no reason to linger around her. Every time he entered a room, she left it. He wasn't blind to it, and it made him question if he'd done something wrong. Maybe he had crossed a line. Later, in the quiet of the nursery, Naomi talked to herself in whispers as she folded Bella's tiny clothes. "Don't be foolish, Naomi," she murmured. "This is not your home. These are not your babies. And he is not your rescue." Still, her hands trembled. She remembered the way he'd looked at her, not with dominance, but with something that terrified her even more. Respect. Grayson sat in his office that night and stared at the framed photo of Elise. Her smile used to calm him. Now, it haunted him. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. He hadn't said those words aloud in years. He could feel something changing in him, a softening he couldn't afford. Naomi wasn't just the help anymore, and that scared the hell out of him. Not because he didn't respect her, but because he did, because for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't numb. The next morning, Naomi found a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. "Naomi, I've arranged for the twins' doctor visit today. I'll be joining. You don't have to go, unless you want to. G." She stared at it for a long time. He was giving her a choice. She hated that she appreciated it. At 2 p.m., she found herself standing next to him in the pediatrician's waiting room. Bella was in her arms, Ezra on Grayson's lap. They sat in silence, until Grayson, softly, asked, "Were you close to your parents?" Naomi's breath caught. She didn't look at him. "My father left when I was a baby. My mother passed when I was 16. He didn't press, but something in his expression shifted, like he saw her more clearly. "And you?" she asked, surprising herself. "My parents were expectations, not people." They shared a glance, not warm, but real. After the appointment, they stepped out into the crisp fall air. The twins were asleep in their car seats. Naomi adjusted Bella's blanket, tucking it around her gently. Grayson watched her, not her hands, her. The quiet way she moved through the world, soft, sure, invisible, unless you were really looking. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable around me," he said suddenly. Naomi stood still. "I haven't done anything to make you feel—" He stopped. "I'm not used to this." "Neither am I," she said quietly. "I'm trying," he added. "I know." And with that, she turned toward the car. That night, Naomi sat at the foot of her twin-sized bed in the servants' quarters and stared at her phone screen. She hadn't called her sister in weeks, hadn't opened the box of baby clothes she kept in her closet for years. She felt like a wall was cracking, and she didn't know if it was supposed to. Meanwhile, Grayson watched the baby monitor from his study, not because he needed to, but because Naomi was in the room, and the twins were asleep with smiles on their faces, because she was there. It started with the kind that turned Manhattan sidewalks into rivers, and the sky into a constant flicker of white-blue fire. By 5 p.m., traffic was chaos, the nanny had cancelled, and Grayson stood in front of Naomi, tension in his shoulders. "She says she can't get here. Road closures." Naomi shrugged slightly. "I can stay with them, sir. It's not a problem." Grayson glanced at the clock. "And dinner?" Naomi lifted an eyebrow, a rare flicker of mischief. "You ordering in?" He sighed. I was supposed to meet with a venture firm. She didn't say they can wait. She just said, the twins need dinner and comfort, not chaos. He hesitated. Then, I'll stay. It was the first time Grayson ever chose to be fully present without being forced to. By 6:30 p.m. the twins were in the bath, giggling as Naomi pretended the washcloth was a spaceship. Grayson stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching like he couldn't believe he was part of this moment. Ezra splashed water over the tub's edge. Hey, Naomi playfully scolded. Sir Ezra the Splashmaster. Grayson chuckled. It slipped out before he could stop it. Naomi glanced over. You have a nice laugh, she said simply. He froze. I didn't mean to, she started. No, he cut in. Thank you. It's just been a while. She nodded and turned back to the kids. But something changed. Softer air, shared space, shared silence. After the twins were tucked into bed, thunder cracked overhead. The city glowed through rain-soaked glass, and Grayson wandered into the kitchen. Naomi was there, barefoot, making tea. You want some? She offered, holding up the kettle. He nodded. They stood in silence until he said, Did you always want to be a maid? Naomi smiled without humor. You don't grow up dreaming of wiping countertops. He winced. That came out wrong. I know what you meant, she said gently. No, I wanted to be a teacher, early childhood education. What happened? Naomi hesitated, fingers tightening around her mug. My daughter got sick. I dropped out of college to care for her. After she passed, her voice faltered. I couldn't go back. I didn't see the point. Grayson blinked. Naomi rarely talked about herself, but the way her voice trembled, like she was speaking through a bruise, made him go still. I'm sorry, he said softly. She nodded. She had eyes like Bella's. That hit him in the chest. I didn't know, he whispered. No one does. I don't tell people. It's easier that way. But you told me. Naomi met his eyes. I don't know why. They sat across from each other at the kitchen island, steam rising between them, thunder still rumbling outside. Grayson cleared his throat. Elise loved storms. Naomi tilted her head. She used to say they made her feel less alone, like the whole world was crying with her. Naomi's breath caught. He'd never said her name before, not to Naomi. She was sick for years, Grayson continued, but I ignored it. I thought money could fix it. Better hospitals, private doctors. Love's not currency, Naomi whispered. No, but I thought it was. He looked down. She died holding a nurse's hand, not mine. Naomi didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just reached out, slowly, and covered his hand with hers. Warmth, real, unforced. His fingers didn't pull away. Hours passed. Naomi checked the twins one more time before heading toward the hallway. I should stay, Grayson said suddenly. She turned. I mean, until the storm passes. You don't have to leave. Naomi hesitated. I sleep downstairs. You don't have to tonight. The offer hung in the air, too tender, too raw. Naomi's breath caught. I don't want misunderstandings. He nodded. It's not like that. She studied him, his eyes, his posture. There was no suggestion, no pressure, just a man who didn't want to be alone for once. Okay, she said. They sat in the living room with blankets and pillows, the sound of rain beating against glass. Naomi eventually fell asleep on one end of the couch, legs curled up, breathing soft. Grayson watched her. Then, without thinking, he whispered, You feel like home. At this point, what do you think he should do? Follow his pride or follow his heart? Would you trust the moment or protect your heart? Let us know in the comments. Morning came with golden light streaming through the tall glass windows. Naomi stirred slowly, eyes fluttering open on the sofa. The blanket had shifted sometime during the night. But it wasn't the blanket that made her heart catch. It was the second one, draped gently over her by someone else's hands. She sat up, The other end of the couch was empty. Grayson was in the kitchen, cooking. "Morning," he said without turning. Naomi blinked. "You cook?" He shrugged. "Not well, but the kids eat eggs, right?" Naomi leaned on the kitchen island, watching him crack eggs with more confidence than she expected. "I usually do this when no one's looking." "So you're showing off now?" she teased gently. He looked over his shoulder, half smiling. "Maybe." It was disarming, domestic, almost warm. Naomi hated how much she liked it. The twins woke and padded in with bedhead and sleepy giggles. Naomi scooped up Bella and kissed her forehead. Grayson lifted Ezra without hesitation. It wasn't perfect. He held him like someone still learning how to love again, but it was real. They all sat at the kitchen table, together, like a family. For one quiet morning, it felt like something out of a dream. Neither of them dared to speak aloud. Later, while the twins napped, Naomi stood by the laundry machines folding sheets. Grayson appeared in the doorway. "There's something I want to show you," he said quietly. Naomi followed him without asking. He led her to a room she hadn't seen before, a study, but not his. Soft wallpaper, a rocking chair, photos of Elise, baby footprints framed, half-filled journals. Naomi's breath caught. "She designed this room," Grayson said, "before she died." Naomi walked slowly toward the shelf. Her fingers traced the edge of a baby photo. "She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but I convinced her to keep her career, said we'd hire help, said it would be easier that way." His voice cracked. "She died resenting me." Naomi turned. "She asked me to stay home the night before the C-section, just to talk, watch a movie. She was scared." Grayson stared at the carpet. "But I took a call, worked late. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already in surgery." Silence wrapped the room. Naomi's eyes filled with quiet understanding. "You blame yourself. I didn't get to say goodbye." Naomi's throat tightened. She crossed the room slowly. "She would have forgiven you." He met her eyes. "Would you?" Naomi blinked. "Me? If someone let you down like that?" Her answer came too fast. "I already did." Grayson frowned. Naomi looked down, twisting the fabric of her sleeve. "The night my daughter stopped breathing, I was asleep." Grayson stood still. "I'd been up for days. I finally dozed off. She was beside me in the hospital bed. I was touching her hand." Her voice cracked. "When I woke up, she was gone." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I didn't say goodbye either." Grayson stepped forward. "Naomi, I never forgave myself. I never let anyone else in after that. Not really." He reached for her, hesitating, then placed a hand gently on her arm. She didn't pull away. Grief met grief, and in that space between them, something fragile began to heal. That night, Naomi opened the box she kept under her bed. Inside were baby shoes, a blanket, a pacifier she couldn't throw away. She sat with them in silence, her tears falling freely for the first time in years. In the room next door, Grayson stood over his sleeping children. His hand brushed Bella's hair. Then, without overthinking it, he walked to the guest room, knocked once, and when Naomi opened it, eyes red but shoulders steady, he said, "Tomorrow. Let's take them to the park." Naomi nodded. "Together," he added. She smiled softly. "Okay. Would you share your past with someone new, or would you keep it locked away?" Comment below. What's harder, letting go or letting someone in? Central Park glowed in the soft gold of a Saturday morning. Leaves crunched underfoot. The twins squealed in delight as Bella chased a squirrel and Ezra toddled toward a pile of leaves taller than him. Grayson stood beside Naomi, a paper coffee cup in hand. No bodyguard, no phone in sight, just him, her, the kids. No walls. Naomi wore her hair down for the first time since she'd started working at the Wolf residence. The soft curls caught the light. Grayson noticed, and she noticed him noticing. "Watch this, Daddy," Bella called. Grayson blinked. It was the first time she'd said it in months. He walked over, knelt, and watched her jump with 2 feet over a small puddle. Ezra clapped like it was the Olympics. Naomi laughed. It was the first time he realized how beautiful her laugh was. Not polished, not soft, just real. They stayed for hours, a shared pretzel, a chase around the duck pond. Naomi slipped once on a slick leaf and Grayson caught her by the elbow. "Careful," he said, their faces inches apart. "Thanks," she whispered, pulling back just before it lingered too long. But the moment hung between them like suspended air. Back at the penthouse, the twins napped, cheeks flushed from the cold. Grayson poured 2 glasses of cider, handed her one without asking. They sat on the floor of the nursery, just like she had weeks ago. "I forgot how good this room could feel," he said. Naomi smiled. "Love can do that." He looked over. "You really believe that?" She hesitated. "I didn't. Not for a long time." Grayson's voice lowered. "And now?" Naomi stared at the twins. "Now? Maybe." They talked for hours. About childhoods, favorite books, secret dreams. Grayson told her he used to paint when he was a teenager. "My father said it was a waste of time." "Do you still paint?" "No," he said. "But sometimes I think about it." "You should." At one point, Naomi told him her daughter's middle name. Hope. She said it with a smile this time. No tears, just warmth. "I think about who she would have been, what her laugh might have sounded like." Grayson said nothing, just reached across the carpet and held her hand. No move, no pressure, just presence. Naomi didn't let go. Dinner was quiet, simple. The twins were too sleepy to fuss. Later, as Grayson cleared the table, Naomi leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching him hum an off-key tune. "Do you ever stop being impressive?" she teased. He looked up, surprised. "I'm not trying to be." "That's what makes it worse," she smiled. There was something so natural about the way they moved now, like magnets finding their alignment. That night, Naomi tucked the twins in while Grayson read a bedtime story. His voice was soft, calm. When he reached the final page, Bella reached up and touched his cheek. "I love you, Daddy." Grayson blinked. He kissed her forehead. "I love you too, Bells." Naomi watched from the hallway, one hand over her chest. Later, as they walked back to the guest room, Grayson paused. "Can I show you something?" Naomi nodded. He led her to a closet in the back of the study and pulled out a canvas. Half finished. Soft strokes of grey and gold. A skyline. A mother holding a child. Rough, incomplete, but full of feeling. "I started this after Elise died. I haven't touched it since." Naomi walked closer. "It's beautiful." He looked at her. "I want to finish it." Naomi looked at the painting, then at him. "Then do it." He looked down, then slowly stepped forward. She didn't move. His hand reached up, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Naomi," he whispered. She exhaled softly. "I know." He leaned in. Their lips met in the softest, quietest kiss. It didn't rush, it didn't burn, it healed. When something feels this real, do you trust it, or wait for it to fall apart? Tell us in the comments, can 2 broken hearts really build something whole? The kiss changed everything. For the first time in years, Naomi allowed herself to feel something that wasn't survival. And for the first time ever, Grayson let someone close without conditions or control. The next morning, they moved around each other with quiet smiles and subtle glances. Not lovers, not strangers, something in between, something new. But the world outside hadn't changed, and the past always finds a way back in. It started with whispers. The household staff wasn't blind. A lingering look here, a late-night tea there. Mrs. Lillian, the housekeeper, approached Naomi in the hallway. "I mean this kindly," she said, "but be careful." Naomi stiffened. "Careful of what?" "Of what this house does to women like us when they get too comfortable." Naomi's throat closed. "I've seen it before," Mrs. Lillian said. "A white man can kiss you in private and call it something special. But the world outside that door won't see it that way, neither will his board. Naomi tried to shake it off, but the words burrowed deep. She began to pull away, softly at first, missing eye contact, speaking only when needed. Grayson noticed. At first he assumed it was nerves, but by day 3 of the shift, he confronted her. "You're avoiding me," he said as they cleaned up after dinner. Naomi shook her head. "I'm just busy." "Don't lie to me." She flinched. Grayson stepped back. "I didn't mean that." "You're my boss," she said, voice sharp now. "It was a mistake." He blinked. "A mistake? This, us. It can't happen. It shouldn't have happened." "Naomi, where is this coming from?" She looked away. "You don't know what it's like to be me in your world." He stepped closer. "Then explain it. You don't get to ask me to open my soul in a house where I'm still expected to clean up after everyone when the music stops." He was quiet, stung. Naomi grabbed a dish towel, folded it too tightly. "You want something real, Grayson? Then stop seeing me as the woman who fixed your family for you." He stared at her. "No," he said finally. "I see you. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because I do feel something. And maybe that scares you more than it scares me." "You don't feel guilt?" she snapped. "For how easily this could all look, like you rescued the maid?" Grayson didn't respond. His silence was the answer. Naomi's voice softened, but it cut deeper. "You say you're trying, but when it matters, you still freeze." That night, Naomi packed a bag. She left the nursery door slightly open, heartbreaking. She whispered to the twins in their sleep, one hand on each tiny back. "I love you," she breathed. "Don't forget me." She left a note on the kitchen island. "Thank you for everything, but I can't stay where I can't belong." Naomi Grayson found the note at dawn. He didn't react, not at first, just stood there, staring at her handwriting, the kitchen bathed in pale light. Then he crumpled it in his fist. He didn't go to work that day. He sat in the nursery all day. Bella climbed into his lap. Ezra played with his cufflinks, and Grayson just held them, silent, hollow. Ava showed up late that afternoon. She took one look at him and said, "You messed it up, didn't you?" "She left," Grayson replied. "Then go get her." "I don't know how." "Then figure it out," she snapped. "Because I've never seen you fight for anything that mattered." He looked up, eyes red. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Then try. For once, try with your heart, not your money." Meanwhile, Naomi sat in her sister's guest bedroom in Queens, staring out the window. A pink onesie sat folded beside her suitcase. She hadn't brought it before, but this time she had packed it. Her heart still ached, but something inside her whispered, "He saw you. And you let him." And that mattered. Naomi didn't sleep that night. Her sister's apartment buzzed with city noise, horns, buses, late-night conversations through the thin walls, but all she could hear were echoes, Ezra's giggles, Bella saying, "Daddy," Grayson whispering, "You feel like home." She pressed her palm against the folded pink onesie in her suitcase. She had brought it as a goodbye. Now it felt like a question. Was she really going to walk away from the first thing that had felt like love in years? Grayson sat in the nursery, lights dimmed. He didn't call Ava, didn't leave voicemails, didn't call Naomi. He just sat, one arm around Bella, one hand resting on Ezra's back. The two of them slept tangled in his arms like they knew she was gone, and it broke him. He reached for his phone, typed Naomi's number, then deleted the message. Did she hate him? Was she gone for good? "You don't know what it's like to be me," she'd said. And she was right. He had loved Elise, yes, but Elise had fit his world, came from money, private schools, white picket safety. She didn't have to defend her space. Naomi had walked into his home with nothing but quiet dignity and earned every ounce of trust, of love, of connection. He had failed her the moment he let her doubt that. The next morning, Naomi watched a mother with 2 toddlers on the subway platform. The younger one dropped a stuffed rabbit and started wailing. Naomi instinctively crouched to pick it up before the mother noticed. She handed it over gently. The little girl looked up at her, teary-eyed, and whispered, "Thank you." Naomi's heart clenched. That afternoon she visited a daycare center near her sister's apartment, just to see it. The receptionist greeted her kindly. "Are you applying for a position?" Naomi smiled. "Just thinking." The walls were painted with handprints, the bookshelf overstuffed with stories. One child ran to the front desk with a crayon drawing of their mom. Naomi nodded to herself. "Thank you," she said, and left. Across the city, Grayson finally did what he hadn't in years. He painted. Brush strokes, slow, shaky. The canvas began to take shape. Not a mother this time, but a woman on the floor, curled between two cribs, holding light in her arms. He didn't cry, but he bled into the painting, and when it was finished he stared at it. Then he whispered, "Come home." Naomi returned to her sister's that evening to find a package by the door. No note, no sender. Inside, a frame. A painting. The painting. She gasped. Her eyes filled instantly, the brushwork, the detail, the quiet reverence. He had painted her, not as a maid, not even as a mother, but as a guardian. A heart, a place where love lived. Her fingers trembled. There was no note. Just a business card taped to the back. "Grayson Wolfe, you were never the maid. You were the miracle." Naomi sat down on the edge of the bed, staring, shaking, breathing. She closed her eyes and made a decision. Back at the penthouse, Grayson was reading to the twins again, alone. Halfway through the book, Bella pointed at the door. "Naomi," she whispered. Grayson looked up. His heart dropped. No one was there. But then, soft footsteps. Naomi stepped in, holding the frame in her arms. "I believe you left something at my door," she said. Grayson stood. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me." "I didn't know if I wanted to," she replied, "but then I looked at the painting and I saw the truth." Grayson swallowed. "What truth?" "That you see me." Silence. Then, "And I see you too." She walked into the nursery. Bella reached for her instantly. Ezra squealed with joy. Naomi sat between the cribs again like she had that very first night. Grayson knelt beside her. Their shoulders touched. This time, she leaned in, and this time, he stayed. Do you believe true love is about timing or about courage? Drop your thoughts below. What would you have done in Naomi's shoes? 3 weeks later, the Wolfe residence didn't feel like the same place. It wasn't the decor, or the layout, or even the people. It was the atmosphere. The silence had changed, from cold and empty to peaceful. The rooms didn't echo anymore. Laughter filled the halls. Warmth came not from fireplaces, but from presence. Naomi was no longer just in the home. She was part of it. Grayson had offered her a new title, Child Development Specialist, equal pay, equal standing. But Naomi had laughed softly and said, "I don't need a title to know who I am here." Still, he had insisted. Because it wasn't about the label, it was about respect. And she deserved that. Every inch of it. One Sunday morning, Naomi stepped into the nursery to find Grayson asleep on the floor. Ezra tucked under one arm. Bella curled against his chest. She froze. It was exactly how he had found her once. Only now, the roles had reversed. Her hand went to her mouth, emotion overwhelming her. Grayson stirred, saw her standing there, and smiled sleepily. "There's something magical about this floor," he said. Naomi chuckled through her tears. "It's where love started." That afternoon, they took the twins to the botanical garden. Naomi wore a sundress. Grayson wore jeans. For once, he didn't check his phone even once. As the kids chased butterflies, Naomi turned to him. "You're different." He tilted his head. "How so?" "You're here," she said. "I was always here." "No," she said gently. "You were around. Now, you're with us." Grayson looked toward the twins, then back at her. "Because I finally have something worth showing up for." He took her hand, and this time there was no hesitation. At bedtime, Bella pulled Naomi close. "Will you stay tonight?" Naomi looked at Grayson. He nodded, so she stayed. She held the children as they drifted off. Grayson sat nearby, just watching her. The quiet awe in his eyes said everything. When the twins were fully asleep, he whispered, "Naomi?" She looked up. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a tiny velvet box. Her heart stopped. "I'm not asking for now. I'm asking for someday," he said. "But I need you to know, this wasn't an accident. You didn't just help me raise them, you raised me too." Her eyes filled instantly. She opened the box. Inside, not a diamond, but a simple gold band etched with one word: home. Months passed. Naomi started night classes again, early childhood development. Grayson insisted on helping with the twins during her study hours. One evening, as Naomi walked in after a late class, she paused in the hallway. The nursery door was slightly ajar. Grayson sat cross-legged on the rug. Ezra snuggled against his side. Bella sat in his lap, book open. Naomi smiled. She had seen that scene before. Only now, it wasn't just healing. It was whole. Do you believe true love can survive even after being tested this hard? Share your thoughts, or your own story of unexpected love, in the comments. Someone might need to hear it today. Years later, people still whispered, the billionaire who fell in love with his maid. But they always missed the real story. It wasn't about wealth, or status, or scandal. It was about two broken people who found their way back to life, through love, on a cold nursery floor. He told her to pack her things, right there in front of the twins. His voice was loud, final, the kind of final that comes from a man who's buried his wife and never healed after. But just as she turned to leave, a small voice broke through the silence. "Don't send her away." Then another, "Please, Daddy. She makes it feel warm again." And in that moment, the man who thought nothing could touch him stood absolutely still. Because the sons who hadn't spoken in weeks just did. And it wasn't just what they said, it was how they said it, like they were remembering something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Richard James didn't believe in miracles. Not anymore. His wife, Claire, was the miracle. And when cancer took her, he locked every soft thing in a box and buried it beside her, including himself. Since then, his mansion became a place of order, not love. Of rules, not grace. Of silence, not laughter. His sons hadn't smiled since the funeral. They hadn't spoken in over a month. And Richard, he convinced himself that emotions were weakness, that pain should be kept behind doors, that if he could control everything, then nothing would ever hurt again. And then she showed up, Stella Gray, a quiet woman with soft eyes and a habit of humming hymns while folding laundry. He didn't like her. He didn't trust softness. He certainly didn't trust the way his sons looked at her, like they remembered what safety felt like. So when he came home that Thursday afternoon and found her kneeling on the floor with both boys wrapped around her, he snapped. His voice filled the marble hallway. "What is this? What did I tell you about boundaries?" She stood slowly, one twin still holding her leg. "Sir, you're done here." His tone left no room for discussion. "Pack your things. I want you out by the hour." She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just looked at him gently as if she saw through all the noise. And then, God moved. Not with thunder, not with fire, but with a whisper. A whisper that came from Freddie, age 5. He looked up at his father, his voice, small, trembling, alive. "Don't send her away." Richard froze. Freddie hadn't spoken in 37 days. Before he could react, Oliver stepped forward, gripping his sleeve. "She makes it feel warm again, Daddy." That's when something inside Richard cracked, not all the way, but enough. Enough for him to stop yelling, enough for him to feel the sting of tears he swore he'd never cry again. The hallway was silent now, Not cold, just still. The kind of still where God speaks. Stella didn't say anything at first. She just knelt, resting a hand on each boy's shoulder, a quiet prayer echoing in her spirit. Lord, don't let this man push them further into silence. Let him see. Let him remember. And Richard, he didn't know why his knees felt weak, or why his dead wife's voice came to him just then. A memory. You don't have to do this alone, Rich. Let them be held. It was too much. He turned, left the hallway without another word. But something had changed, and Stella knew. Not because he softened, but because he didn't slam the door. Sometimes God doesn't fix the storm. He just sends someone who doesn't leave. If this moment touched you, click subscribe, like this video, and let us know where you're watching from. I pray this story reminds you, sometimes God sends healing in the form of a person who simply stays. The hallway was still quiet when Stella zipped up her small suitcase. She'd folded her uniform carefully, as if doing so gently might ease the ache in her chest. She wasn't surprised by the outcome. She had seen this kind of pain before. Grief that builds walls so tall, even love can't climb them without permission. But still, she had hoped. She sat on the edge of the guest bed, hands resting in her lap, heart steady but heavy. Sometimes obedience doesn't look like staying. Sometimes it looks like walking away when God hasn't made the next step clear. She closed her eyes, whispered under her breath, "If you sent me here for only that moment, I trust you. But if there's more, Lord, I make it plain I won't force my way into anyone's healing." Then, a knock. Soft. Hesitant. Not from authority. From small fingers and courage. She opened the door, expecting silence. Instead, she found Oliver. His cheeks were flushed from crying. In his hand, a drawing. A stick figure family. 2 little boys, 1 tall man, and 1 woman. In the middle, she stood holding hands with them. No words, just that. He looked up at her, lips trembling. She didn't say anything, just knelt beside him. And in the quiet, her eyes stung, not from sadness, but from knowing. This boy, this silent, closed-off, broken-hearted boy, had chosen her. The next morning came slower than usual. The sun rose, but the house remained dim, as if unsure it was allowed to be warm again. Stella stood in the kitchen, not in uniform this time. No apron, no instructions, no clarity. Just waiting. She wasn't sure if she'd already been replaced. But she stayed. Sometimes, waiting is obedience too. A soft clatter echoed behind her. 2 chairs slid across the kitchen floor. The twins, climbing into their seats, waiting quietly for breakfast like they always did, except now they were watching her. Freddie spoke first. A whisper, barely there. "Pancakes?" She turned slowly. "You remember I made pancakes?" He nodded. Stella blinked back the sudden sting in her chest. Then pancakes it is. She didn't need permission. She needed purpose. And right now, their hunger felt holy. The batter sizzled. Butter melted on the skillet. The boys sat still, but their eyes followed her every move. Halfway through flipping the first stack, she heard footsteps again. This time, slower, measured. Richard James entered the room. His suit was crisp, but his eyes weren't sharp this morning. They looked like a man who hadn't slept, like a man who had listened to the silence and found it heavier than he could carry. He didn't speak, didn't order, didn't even ask why she was still here, just watched. And for the first time since Claire died, he saw his sons giggle at pancake bubbles, saw Oliver reach across the table to poke his brother's cheek, saw Freddie whisper something only Stella heard, and saw her smile back with eyes that knew children better than any manual ever could. He leaned against the doorframe and said nothing. But inside, something was breaking, not like glass, more like ground thawing after a long winter. Later that morning, Stella stepped outside to catch her breath, not because she was tired, but because too much good after too much grief feels like holding your breath underwater. She leaned against the back wall of the house, her eyes closed toward the sky. "If you're doing something, Lord, keep me soft. Let me be what they need, even if I never get credit for it." When she turned back toward the house, Richard was standing behind the glass, watching. Not glaring, not angry, just watching. Like he didn't know what to do with a moment that didn't ask him to lead it. By evening, the house had shifted. Not loud, not bright, but different. A napkin left unfolded, a toy left on the couch, and laughter just once from upstairs. Stella didn't know what the next day would hold, whether she'd be allowed to stay or if this was just a borrowed moment. But she did know this. Something had opened. And when God opens something, no man can close it. She walked past the study late that night. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Richard sat at his desk staring at an old photo. Claire, holding the boys, her arms wide, her smile wide, her eyes bright with something this house had forgotten. Joy. He didn't notice Stella passing, but she saw him. Saw the way he gripped the frame like it was keeping him alive. Saw the way his shoulders sagged just slightly, as if he was finally letting grief fall where it belonged. On the ground. At God's feet. The next morning came quietly. No raised voices, no instructions, no permission either. Just Stella in the kitchen, humming as she poured pancake batter into a warmed skillet, and two little boys with tousled blonde hair sitting at the table, waiting like they had always belonged to the moment. It was only her 5th day at the estate, but something in the air already felt different, not healed, but softer. She wasn't wearing the uniform today. It felt wrong, too pressed, too distant, so she wore a pale blue blouse and jeans, simple and clean. Nothing fancy. But she'd always believed warmth didn't come from clothes anyway. It came from presence. The boys seemed lighter. Freddie was tapping the spoon against his glass, not to annoy, just to hear the sound. Oliver giggled when she flipped a pancake too high and had to catch it with a plate. There was a looseness to them now. Not loud, but alive. She almost forgot this wasn't hers to keep, until he walked in. Richard James entered the kitchen with the tension of a man still wearing grief like armor. His jaw was tight, his sleeves perfectly rolled, not a hair out of place. But his eyes didn't match the rest of him today. They looked like someone who hadn't decided who he needed to be yet. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, long enough for Freddie to notice, long enough for Oliver to turn in his seat and go still. The joy in the room slipped into hiding. The boys didn't move, didn't speak. They just stared at their father like they were waiting for permission to exist again. Stella stayed by the stove, calm, but alert. She could feel it coming, the command. Richard cleared his throat. "Miss Gray." His voice was formal, cold. "We need to talk." She turned, gently, met his eyes, didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." "Not here." The boys looked between them. Stella gave a quiet smile to the boys. "Finish your breakfast. I'll be right back." Freddie nodded slowly, eyes wide. Oliver's lips pressed into a tight line, but he stayed seated. That was new. A week ago they would have followed her like shadows. Now, they trusted her promise. The study door clicked shut behind them. Books lined the walls. Everything was sharp and dark, mahogany wood, leather chairs, spotless floors, like a room built for control. Richard stood behind his desk, fingers clenched around the back of his chair. Stella stood across from him, hands folded in front of her. Still, respectful, but not afraid. He let silence hang for a moment too long, then spoke. "You were hired to clean, not to play, not to counsel, not to interfere." Stella held his gaze. "I understand." He paced once behind the chair. His voice dropped lower. "You were told the boys need structure, boundaries, professional supervision." Stella spoke gently. "And in that structure they stopped speaking." He froze, not because he didn't know it, but because hearing it out loud sounded like failure. She continued, voice soft as cloth. "I didn't touch them first, they came to me. I didn't ask them to speak. But when they did, her eyes flickered with emotion, but her tone stayed steady. I knew better than to silence it. Richard looked at her then, truly looked, not like an employee, like a person who had seen something he hadn't, and that made him angry, not at her, at everything, at the fact that it wasn't supposed to be her. Not some woman from a cleaning agency with a quiet voice and no degree in child psychology. Not someone humming hymns while folding towels. "Why you?" he said quietly, more to himself than her. Stella didn't answer right away. She just let the question sit in the room, because she'd asked herself the same thing, every night. Then she stepped forward, not closer, just clearer. "Because I've known loss, Mr. James. I've seen what it does when it hardens people, and I've seen what happens when someone stays long enough to soften it again." He looked away then, swallowed hard. She didn't push, didn't try to fix him. She just stood still, like a presence that didn't demand anything. Sometimes that's all grief needs. Not words, not action. Just someone who doesn't leave when it gets heavy. He finally spoke again. "I haven't heard them laugh in months." It wasn't a confession, but it wasn't denial either. She nodded gently. "They're not healed, but they're reaching." His gaze met hers once more. "Don't make promises you can't keep." Her reply was soft, almost like prayer. "I won't. But I'll keep showing up." He didn't answer, just sat down at his desk rubbing his temples. The conversation was over, not resolved, but open, and for now, that was enough. Stella stepped back into the hallway. The boys were still at the table, crayon drawings spread between them. Freddie looked up, worry flickering in his eyes. Stella gave the smallest nod, a quiet yes. She was still here. And somewhere in the study behind her, a man who thought God had left his house sat with his head in his hands, wondering why the silence felt different today. That night the wind was heavy across the hill. Branches tapped the windows, the kind of restless tapping that made the house feel uneasy, like it too remembered something it didn't want to feel. Stella stood by the guest room window, arms wrapped loosely around her waist, eyes on the darkness outside. She hadn't unpacked. Her bag still sat on the bench, half zipped, half ready. She never stayed too long in any house. Sometimes grief didn't push you out, it simply never invited you in. Down the hall, laughter, soft and sleepy, drifted from the boys' room. A storybook, some giggles, a whispered, "Good night." It should have been comforting, but instead it pressed against something buried inside her. She blinked slowly. Her hands tightened. Then she walked over to the bag and pulled out a small, battered photo. Edges worn, folded once down the middle. A boy, maybe 10 years old. Freckles, a smile too wide for his face. Her little brother, Joshua. She sat on the bed, turning the photo over, a scribbled verse in faint blue ink. "Even if he doesn't, he is still good." Daniel, 3:18. Her thumb brushed the edge of the page. That verse had been taped to his hospital bed. She'd written it, but after the fire, after the smoke, the screaming, the split-second choice to grab the baby next door first, she stopped believing it, stopped teaching, stopped singing, stopped letting herself be close to anyone who might reach for her and not survive. A soft knock pulled her back. Not loud, just one knock. Then the door creaked open. It was Oliver, in pajama pants too long and a mismatched shirt, hair sticking up on one side like he'd fallen asleep and woken up just to come find her. In his hand, a drawing. Another one. This one had 3 figures, 2 boys, 1 woman. No man this time. Just the 3 of them under a sun that looked more like a heart. He walked over and held it out. She took it slowly. "You made this tonight?" He nodded. Then, for the first time, spoke with quiet certainty. "Freddie said you don't leave." Her breath caught. Not because the words were dramatic, but because they were true. He climbed up beside her without asking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And when he leaned his head against her arm, she whispered into the silence, "I lost someone too." His fingers stilled against the fabric of her shirt. My brother. A long time ago. He was small, kind. He loved building things out of cardboard. She smiled faintly. After he died, I stopped building anything at all. Oliver didn't speak, but he didn't leave either. His presence gave her permission to continue. I was a teacher once, but grief made me question if I could protect anyone again. So I cleaned instead. It was easier to scrub away other people's messes than face the mess inside myself. She exhaled, voice low. But God kept placing children in my path. One here, one there, and then you two. Oliver looked up at her. God sent you. The question was so innocent, so raw, it nearly undid her. She could have brushed it off, could have smiled and nodded like adults do when the truth hurts too much, but she didn't. She looked him in the eyes. I think God sent you to remind me not to run anymore. Oliver's lower lip trembled, but he smiled. Not wide, not bright, but real. Later, when he'd fallen asleep beside her, she carried him gently back to his room. Freddie stirred when she laid his brother down, opened his eyes, reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation, held it longer than necessary, and in that quiet, something lifted from the room. Not the pain, not the past, but the weight of walking through it alone. She walked back to her room, her feet light, but her heart full. God hadn't healed her wound, but he was using it. Not through grand gestures, but through two little boys who drew pictures with hearts for sons. Down the hallway a door creaked. Richard, standing in the shadows, watching. He hadn't said a word all night, but his sons had laughed, and the woman he tried to fire had held both their hearts in her hands, without asking for anything in return. He turned back toward his study, pulled open a drawer he hadn't touched in months. Inside, a letter, still sealed, Claire's handwriting on the front. He stared at it, but didn't open it. Not yet. The morning light didn't touch the house the same way it had the day before. It filtered in slower, as if uncertain, stretching long shadows across the walls and settling in corners that still remembered grief. Stella stood in the linen hallway, folding warm towels from the dryer, her hands moving on instinct. Her mind elsewhere. Last night hadn't left her. The drawing. The boy curled against her shoulder. The memory of her brother's name whispered in the quiet of her room. Some things stay in the skin long after they leave the air. Across the corridor, the boys were building something with blocks. Stella could hear the soft clatter, the kind that sounded more like restoration than play. They were healing, not because she taught them, but because they felt safe. And yet, she didn't feel settled. Richard hadn't spoken to her since the conversation in the study. Not a word, not a glance. Just silence where suspicion used to be. But silence had weight, and this one felt heavier than before. She walked past the main hall, her steps light. A family portrait hung by the staircase. Claire smiling, her arms around the boys, Richard behind them, distant even in the frame. It was the only photo in the house with her face on it. Stella paused there. Claire didn't look fragile. She looked bright, present, like she was the warmth this place was trying to remember. She moved on without touching it. The boys had asked her to help them find their lost puzzle pieces, said they were hidden in the closet by the soft stuff. She assumed they meant blankets, but when she opened the linen closet by the end of the west wing, something caught her eye. A small cardboard box, tucked behind folded quilts and labeled only with a name. Claire. No last name. She stood frozen just for a moment. Not from fear but reverence, she could feel it. This wasn't clutter, it was sacred. She reached for it gently, holding it as if it might break or breathe. She brought it to the sitting room, where light filtered through the lace curtains just enough to make the dust shimmer. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, the box between her knees. She didn't open it, not at first. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer with no language. Just surrender. Then she lifted the lid. Inside, a stack of drawings, clearly the boys', with their shaky handwriting and bold, chaotic color. One said, "Mummy's hair in the wind." Another, Mommy in heaven but still watching. Beneath them, a collection of small audio tapes, labeled in pen. For the hard days, if they ever forget how to laugh. To Richard, when you feel far away. And then, at the very bottom, a letter, sealed, his name written in blue ink. For Richard, open when silence feels safer than love. Stella's hand trembled. She didn't open it. It wasn't hers. She just stared at the envelope, realizing it had been there all along. Unopened, unheard. And suddenly, she wasn't angry at him. She just felt sad. Because sometimes grief doesn't forget, it buries. She heard footsteps behind her, not fast, but deliberate. She turned, the box still in her lap. Richard stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other hanging awkwardly by his side. His eyes didn't go to her. They went to the box, and for the first time, something in his face changed. Not rage, not confusion, recognition. He exhaled, a small, sharp breath, as if his own name startled him. Stella didn't move. She didn't explain. She simply held the box out, arms extended, like someone offering back a memory that never belonged to her. Richard stared at it, then stepped forward, slowly. He knelt. Not beside her, not close, just low enough to feel the weight of what he'd ignored. He reached for the letter, paused, then let his hand fall. "I can't." It was barely a whisper. Stella nodded. "I know." His voice cracked. She used to record things. After the boys went to sleep, she said love leaves a trail, even if no one's following it yet. Stella watched him, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his voice softened as if speaking to someone long gone, or maybe still here. "She left this trail for you," she said gently, "and for them." He didn't reply, but he took the box from her hands, cradled it like something living, and stood. The moment didn't close anything, but something opened, not between them, inside him. That night, the boys asked if they could listen to a mommy tape, said they remembered the sound of her voice, but just barely. Richard stood in the doorway as Stella placed the first tape into the old recorder. Claire's voice filled the room, soft, strong, familiar. "If you forget how to love, let the boys remind you. If the house gets too quiet, bring someone in who knows how to listen between the silences." Stella didn't look at Richard, but she could feel it. The shaking breath he let out, the way his hand curled against the doorframe. She closed her eyes, not to escape the moment, but to let it land. Sometimes God speaks not through thunder, but through a voice left behind on tape. It started with laughter, not loud, not wild. Just a giggle, soft and surprised, in the middle of a Tuesday breakfast. Freddie spilled a spoonful of syrup on his pajama shirt, and Oliver made a face like it was the end of the world. Then they both laughed. Real laughter. The kind that comes from a place not even they knew was waking up. Stella froze for a second, spatula in hand, mid-flip. She didn't speak, didn't draw attention to it. She just let it live. Because joy, especially fragile joy, should never feel interrupted. Across the kitchen, Richard stood behind the morning paper, still, silent, but not unreadable. His eyes had lifted when the boys laughed, and for a breath or two, they stayed lifted. But then he looked back down. The days began to shift in small ways. The boys started speaking more, not in long sentences, but in patterns, in questions, in giggles that echoed into rooms that hadn't heard childhood in months. They began leaving their toys in the living room, their socks on the stairs. They fought over which pancakes were crispier. They asked for seconds. And in the middle of it all was Stella, humming softly under her breath, always listening, always near. The house felt warmer, not by temperature, but by presence. It wasn't perfect. Grief still hung in corners. Claire's absence still hovered in every room, but something had changed. This house was breathing again. That afternoon, Stella sat in the garden just beyond the kitchen, sorting through a basket of the boys' outgrown clothes for donation. The air smelled like soil and rosemary. A breeze pushed through the hydrangeas. She wasn't sure how long she'd been sitting there when Richard stepped out. No jacket, no phone, no clipboard, just him. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching her fold a tiny shirt with sailboats on it. "I bought that for Freddie when we took them to the lake," he said quietly. "Claire said it made him look like a storybook sailor." Stella smiled but didn't look up. "Fits him." A pause, then, "You stayed," he said. She lifted her gaze slowly, met his eyes. "Yes," she replied. "I didn't know if I should, but I felt led." He sat down on the edge of the bench, hands resting on his knees. "I don't understand why this hurts more now than it did before." His voice wasn't defensive. It was honest, worn. Stella set the basket aside. "Because before, you kept everything numb," she said. "And now, the feeling is coming back." Richard ran a hand through his hair. She made it all look easy. The parenting, the laughter, the way she gave. "I never learned how to do that without her." "You don't have to do it perfectly," Stella said. "You just have to show up." A moment passed, then another. The wind picked up again, rustling the pages of a book left open on the garden table. He looked toward the sound, then back at her. "Do you believe God and puts people in our lives like this?" he asked. Stella didn't answer right away. "I believe God doesn't waste pain," she said slowly. "And I believe he sends help, sometimes through people we never saw coming." Richard's jaw clenched, but not with anger, with restraint. He looked down at his hands. "I've spent months trying to control everything. The schedule, the boys, the silence. Because the truth is, I didn't want anyone to see how badly I was breaking." She didn't interrupt. She just listened, fully, quietly. "Some nights, I still wake up expecting her to be there," he said. "I reach across the bed, and when I remember, it all floods back." His voice cracked. "I thought I was keeping the boys safe by locking everything down. No music, no touch, no emotion." He shook his head. "But I was really just trying not to feel." Stella's voice came like water. But they were still feeling, alone. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The only sound was the garden wind and the distant laugh of a boy chasing his brother. Then, something shifted. Richard looked up. Tears didn't fall, but his face was no longer guarded. There was pain there, but also humility. Something that said, "I know I can't keep this house cold forever." That night, Stella didn't pray to stay. She just prayed that whatever God was doing, he'd keep doing it, even if it broke every rule this house once lived by. After the boys went to sleep, Richard stood alone in Claire's old study. The box was still there. The letter, unopened. He ran his fingers over the sealed edge, pressed his thumb beneath the flap, then stopped. Not tonight, but soon, very soon. And in the hallway just beyond, the hum of Stella's voice as she quietly picked up a scattered toy, like a lullaby not meant to be noticed, but still deeply felt. The storm rolled in just after midnight. No warning, no gentle breeze to announce its arrival, just thunder. Close, fast, unforgiving. The kind of storm that wakes a house in its bones. Rain pounded the windows like 100 fists. Wind curled around the estate like it wanted in. Stella was already up. Something had stirred her before the first crack of thunder. Not sound, but a feeling. A tension in the air. A whisper in her spirit. She slipped from bed barefoot and moved through the dark with quiet urgency. Not toward the hallway, but toward the boys' room. When she pushed the door open, she didn't hear crying. She heard silence, too still, too tight. Then her eyes adjusted. Freddie sat up in bed, his fingers gripping the quilt. But it was Noah, curled against the headboard, shaking, who made her stop. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving, just frozen. As thunder cracked again, Stella entered slowly, keeping her voice low. "Hey, sweetheart." But Noah didn't look up. His hands were balled into fists, pressed against his mouth. Freddie watched, eyes wide and scared. He didn't know what to do. He only knew this wasn't normal. Stella knelt beside the bed. "It's just a storm, baby. Just the sky being loud." Noah flinched. His chest rose and fell too fast. Breath caught halfway between inhale and panic. And Stella knew then. This wasn't just about thunder. This was about memory, the kind that hides until lightning calls it back. The door burst open behind her. Richard. He looked half asleep, fully alarmed, his shirt clinging to one side and his hair undone. His eyes locked onto Noah. "What happened?" His voice was sharper than intended. Freddie shrank back in the bed. Noah didn't respond, still shaking, still silent. Richard stepped forward. "I'll call Dr. Lang. He said if this happens, he needs presence." Stella interrupted softly. Richard stopped, his fists clenched. "Presence doesn't stop panic." Stella looked up at him. "No, but panic doesn't survive love." It wasn't a challenge. It was truth. She turned back to Noah, staying close, but not touching. Not yet. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." He rocked slightly, whispered something that sounded like Mom. It shattered something in Richard's posture. He dropped to one knee beside the bed. His voice cracked. "Noah." The boy didn't respond. He was too far in, too deep. Stella reached behind her, grasped one of the boy's worn blankets and gently laid it across his lap. Then she began humming. Soft, low, not to fix, but to steady. A song her mother once sang in the middle of hard nights. Not a lullaby. A prayer. Richard just stared, helpless, unarmed. This was the moment he had spent months trying to prevent. And now it was here, and all his defenses were useless. Noah's fists began to loosen, barely. But enough. His breathing slowed. One hand uncurled and reached out, not for Stella, for his father. Richard didn't move at first. Then slowly, he placed his hand beneath his son's. Noah gripped it, tight. And then, for the first time in weeks, he cried. Not from fear, from release. The room went quiet. The storm still screamed outside, but inside, something calmed. Stella stepped back. Let them have it. The moment, the breakthrough, the grace. Later, after the boys had fallen asleep, Noah still holding onto Richard's shirt, Stella found herself in the hallway outside their room. She leaned against the wall, hands trembling, not from fear, from awe. God had shown up. In the middle of thunder, he had answered a prayer too deep for words, and she had watched a father finally hold his son without hiding behind control. Richard stepped out not long after. He looked undone, and more human than he'd ever appeared. His voice was hoarse. "I didn't know what to do." Stella met his eyes. "You didn't have to know. You just had to stay." He nodded once, then, "Thank you." It wasn't enough, but it was honest. She didn't reply, just placed a gentle hand on his arm and gave the smallest nod. There would be more storms. But now, he knew how to weather one. Later that night, Richard sat alone in the boys' playroom, staring at a wooden block tower still standing from the afternoon. He picked up one of the blocks, held it in his palm, and wept. Quietly. Not because of what was lost, but because, for the first time, he believed healing might still be possible. The morning after the storm, the house held its breath. No voices, no rushing, only a quiet that felt reverent. The kind of silence that follows a sacred breaking. Richard sat alone in Claire's old study. The curtains were half drawn, letting in soft morning light that painted the room in gold and dust. On the desk in front of him, the box sat open, and next to it, the letter, still sealed, still waiting. He hadn't touched it yet. He didn't even reach for his coffee, didn't check his phone, didn't move. He just sat there, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes locked on a name written in blue ink. Claire. Not wife, not mother. Just Claire. The woman who once laughed in this room while folding baby clothes and humming to herself like she didn't know life could break. He missed her most in silence, not in anniversaries or milestones, but in mornings like this, when the boys were still asleep, and the only sound was the ache of her absence. He finally reached for the envelope. The paper felt thin, but it shook in his hands like it carried weight. He didn't open it right away. He held it to his chest for a moment, closed his eyes. God, if I'm going to read this, help me listen. And then, slowly, he tore the seal. The letter unfolded like it had been waiting years to breathe. Claire's handwriting, familiar, full of loops and kindness, spilled across the page in quiet strength. My love, she wrote, if you're reading this, it means the house has gone quiet. I always knew it might. You were never built for loss, Richard. You built walls for business, for negotiation, but not for grief. That kind of pain doesn't obey plans, it doesn't follow schedules. You tried to hold everything together. You did. But sometimes, holding too tight is what makes things fall apart. The boys don't need perfection. They need presence, laughter, mess, noise, and you. Let them feel, let them cry, let them be hugged until they fall asleep in your arms again. And if the house forgets how to breathe, bring someone in who knows how to listen between the silences. The last line stopped him. He read it twice, then a third time. His breath shuddered. He thought he'd done what was best, by keeping the house in order, by locking away anything soft. But he had misunderstood strength and mistaken grief for failure. Stella's voice came back to him then, from the night before. You don't have to know what to do. You just have to stay. And he had. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but he had stayed. The sound of feet padded softly in the hallway, not rushed, just familiar. Richard folded the letter, pressed it against his chest, and turned. The door cracked open. Stella stood there, her hand resting on the frame. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. I read it, he said. Her expression softened. He stood slowly, walked toward her, the letter still in hand. For a moment, they simply stood in the quiet. Two people not trying to fix anything, just letting truth settle between them. Later that afternoon, Richard called a meeting with his board. He stood at the head of a long glass table in a room filled with polished ambition. But this time, he didn't speak from authority. He spoke from honesty. My sons need a father right now, not a CEO. Some of the men and women exchanged glances, but no one interrupted. He continued, effective immediately, I'm stepping back. Not to escape, but to show up. We've built towers that scrape the sky, but I've forgotten how to build a home. By evening, the house was still quiet, but not empty. The boys ran through the hallway chasing a balloon, laughing as it floated just out of reach. Stella was in the kitchen, humming over a pot of soup, the kind of tune you don't sing to be heard, just to keep peace near. And Richard. He stood by the living room window, watching his sons move with the kind of joy that once felt extinct. His fingers brushed the edge of Claire's letter, tucked inside his shirt pocket. He didn't smile, not fully, but something in his eyes broke open, like light through a sky long overcast. That night, he sat in the boys' room, not as a visitor, as their father. He told them a story. One Claire used to tell, about a lighthouse and a storm. Freddie rested his head on his shoulder. Noah clutched his hand, and when they fell asleep, Richard stayed, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. And for the first time he whispered a prayer, not for success, not for control, just gratitude. Thank you for not leaving us in the silence. It was Stella who found it, tucked high in the attic, in a corner that hadn't been touched since Claire's last spring. The light came in through a dusty pane of glass, painting long beams across boxes labeled Christmas, baby toys, Claire. She had only meant to find a blanket. But instead, she found a trunk. Inside, music sheets, old letters and journals, and a red cloth tail spilling out from the edge of a folded object. A kite, worn, a little frayed, but beautiful, hand-painted with bluebirds in flight and Claire's handwriting on the tail. For the days when joy feels far. Later that afternoon, she showed it to the boys. Noah traced the birds with his fingertips. Freddie read the words softly, lips moving like a prayer. Neither of them had flown a kite before, but they knew what it was. And somehow, they knew it mattered. The hill behind the estate wasn't large, but it rose just enough to catch the wind. Stella walked up with the boys, while the late autumn sun sank gently into the earth behind them. Richard followed at a distance. He hadn't been on that hill since Claire died. It was where they used to sit. On Sunday afternoons, when the world was quiet and their boys were still small enough to carry. The grass crunched underfoot, and when they reached the top, the wind lifted suddenly, as if summoned. Stella knelt to tie the string around the boy's hands. "You hold it," she said, "but let the wind do the rest." They ran. At first the kite stumbled, lifted once, fell. Freddie looked discouraged, but Noah tugged the string tighter, held his breath, then ran again. This time, it caught. The red kite rose high above them, dancing against the deepening sky. It pulled and soared, tail fluttering like a memory made visible. Richard stopped walking, just watched. Watched his sons running, watched their laughter returning, watched Stella's face tilted upward, her smile soft and knowing. He felt something in his chest, not pain, but space, room. He walked the rest of the way, didn't speak, just stood beside them, eyes following the kite as it climbed higher. Freddie tugged his sleeve. "Mom made it." Richard looked down. "We found it in her trunk," Noah added. "She wanted us to fly it." There was no mistaking the hope in their voices, not the kind children fake, the kind that returns when sorrow begins to loosen its grip. He crouched beside them, took the string from Noah's hand for a moment, held it up toward the sky, let it pull, and whispered, so only they could hear, "She'd be proud of you." As the sun slipped below the tree line, the kite danced like a flame against the sky. Not a goodbye, a signal that something was still rising even after everything else had fallen. Later that night, Stella found Richard in the kitchen. He was pouring 2 mugs of tea. When he turned, he handed one to her. Didn't say much, just smiled, and slid an envelope across the counter. She opened it slowly. Inside, a formal offer. Child engagement specialist. Full-time. With a note handwritten at the bottom. "This house is breathing again. Stay if you still feel called." Her eyes lingered on the word. Called, not hired. Called. She looked up. Richard's voice was quiet. "You didn't come to save us, I know that. But God used you anyway." She swallowed hard. "I didn't come to stay." He nodded. "But maybe staying is obedience now." They didn't need to say more. Some answers don't arrive as sentences. Only peace. Later that night, Richard sat on the edge of the boys' bed, reading from Claire's old storybook. Both boys had fallen asleep mid-chapter, heads resting on his arms. He didn't move. The red kite sat folded near the window. The wind outside had stilled, but in his heart, something was just beginning to lift. He kissed each boy on the forehead, and before he turned out the light, he looked toward the ceiling, eyes wet, but smiling. "I'm learning, Claire," he whispered. "I'm still learning." The house didn't look different. The marble floors still gleamed. The grand staircase still curved like a sculpture carved into silence. But something had shifted. You could feel it. In the way the walls no longer echoed with emptiness. In the way laughter no longer felt like a stranger. In the way the front door no longer felt like a finish line, but a welcome. Stella stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled, rinsing blueberries for breakfast. No apron, no uniform, just comfort woven into the rhythm of morning. A cartoon hummed quietly from the living room where the twins sat shoulder to shoulder, building a fort from cushions and giggles. From time to time, one of them would glance toward the kitchen just to make sure she was still there. She always was. Upstairs, Richard stood in what used to be Claire's reading room. Now it was something new. The walls were painted soft yellow, bookshelves lined the corners, a piano by the window, crayon art taped to one wall like stained glass. They called it Claire's Corner. Not as a shrine, but as a beginning. A room for memory, yes, but also for music, and mess, and presence. He pressed his palm against the doorway for a moment, then turned, walked down the stairs, and into the life he once kept at arm's length. That afternoon, a new rhythm unfolded. Lunch was loud, napkins unfolded, jokes told. Freddie spilled water across the table, and no one flinched. Oliver sang the wrong words to a song, and everyone laughed until they cried, even Richard. He had started to laugh again, not like a man escaping grief, but like someone who had finally made room for both joy and loss at the same table. After the dishes were cleared, he sat with Stella in the sunroom. The boys were outside with chalk, drawing suns and rockets and messy stick figures that always included her. He handed her an envelope, thicker than the last one. Inside, legal papers. At the bottom, his signature, and a line added in pen. In the event of anything unforeseen, Stella Gray is to be the children's legal guardian. She looked up at him, speechless. He didn't explain, just said quietly, "You became their safe place. Not because you were assigned, because you stayed." Her throat tightened. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything I didn't plan." That night, the boys asked her to read the bedtime story from her chair, the one beside their bunk beds. It was a story about home, about a house that stood through every kind of weather because someone inside always kept the light on. They were asleep before she reached the last page, but she read it to the end anyway. Then she sat in the silence for a moment, watching their chests rise and fall, and she whispered, "Thank you, God, for trusting me with them." Downstairs, Richard stood at the fireplace, in his hands, the last of Claire's journals. He didn't read it. He just held it, then placed it gently beside the family photo on the mantel, the one he'd finally put back. Stella's coat hung near the door now, her keys in the dish, her voice woven into the fabric of the home. He didn't know when the shift happened. He only knew that healing hadn't come like thunder. It had come in quiet, obedient steps. The next morning, the four of them walked to the hill behind the house. Freddie held the kite string. Oliver carried the tail. Stella walked beside them, one hand on Richard's arm. The wind lifted just as they reached the top. The kite rose easily this time. No stumbling, no hesitation. And the boys ran together, not away from grief, but toward something lighter. Richard stood back, watching them soar, then turned to Stella. "Do you regret not going back to teaching?" She smiled. "No, I just changed classrooms." He nodded. "And me?" Her voice was soft. "You didn't need a teacher. You needed someone to remind you that grief doesn't get the last word." He looked out over the hill. The kite arced higher. The boys' laughter rang out, filling the air like music. He reached into his pocket, pulled out Claire's last letter, creased from being read too many times. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Later, as the sun sank low and the sky burned soft orange, the four of them lay on a blanket watching the clouds shift like stories. Freddie rested against Stella's side. Oliver tucked into his father's chest. No words were spoken. There was no need. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was full, whole, and somewhere in the stillness it felt like Claire was smiling, not from the past, but from right there with them, in the wind, the laughter, the healing, and in the family they chose to become. He hadn't heard his son's voice in 2 years. Not a word. Not even a sound. Then one afternoon, he came home early and found his little boy on the floor, smiling, holding a toy stethoscope, pressed to the chest of a woman he barely knew. And then the boy whispered something that broke him completely. "You're okay, Mummy." The woman was just the housekeeper. No training, no therapy, no reason this moment should have happened. But in that quiet living room, something sacred took place. And Anthony Scott, a man who built billion-dollar systems to solve the world's problems, stood frozen, watching his son speak for the first time to a stranger. He didn't hire her to heal anyone. He just needed the house cleaned. Someone to mop the floors, do the laundry, keep things quiet. After losing his wife, Anthony didn't care much who came through the door anymore. He was tired. Tired of interviews. Tired of hoping. Tired of watching his son slip further away. Adrian had been diagnosed with nonverbal autism right after the funeral. He stopped talking. He stopped looking people in the eyes. Stopped playing. Stopped everything. Touch scared him. Noise made him panic. Meals were a battle. Sleep never came easy. Anthony had tried it all. Therapists, specialists, custom programs. 7 housekeepers in 1 month gone. Nothing worked. And honestly, he didn't expect anything different from this one. Regina Wilson. She showed up quiet, kept her head down, and didn't ask many questions. He barely remembered the interview. He just told her where the cleaning supplies were and left. He didn't know her story. He didn't care. But God did. And what happened in that house, what he saw with his own eyes that day, wasn't an accident. It was grace, in the form of a woman no one saw coming. If you've ever asked God for a sign, and waited, and nothing happened, I want you to stay with this story, because sometimes the breakthrough doesn't look like a miracle. It looks like a quiet woman, folding laundry in the hallway, while a father stands in the doorway, weeping. If this story speaks to something inside you, subscribe, like this video, and tell us where you're watching from. Not just your city, but the place you're standing in right now, emotionally, spiritually, because this story isn't just about a boy who found his voice. It's about the God who never stopped listening. Anthony used to be the kind of man who had answers. People brought him problems, he solved them, quickly, efficiently, without emotion. But there's no manual for what to do when your child stops speaking. He remembered the last word his son ever said. It was, "Mama." Said it once, quiet, right after the ambulance drove away. After that, nothing. It had been 2 years. No words, no eye contact, no reaction when Anthony walked into the room. Adrian was 6 now, but in some ways, he still looked like that same little boy who stood frozen by the kitchen doorway the morning Julia died. Anthony still saw it sometimes, the way Adrian watched the floor, how his fingers curled tight when someone turned on the sink, how he covered his ears when the wind picked up outside. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath. Anthony tried everything. Therapists flew in, specialists called in, teams assembled. Each one walked through the front door full of plans, left exhausted, defeated, and quiet. 7 maids had come and gone. Some left in tears. One quit after just 3 hours. None of them could handle it. Not the mess, not the child, not the grief that lived in the walls. Anthony stopped asking their names after a while. Stopped giving instructions. Just told the agency, "Send someone who can do the work. That's it." And then one morning, she showed up. Regina Wilson. She didn't knock like the others. Didn't have a clipboard or a nervous smile. The cook let her in through the side. She wore a plain shirt, pulled her hair back. Carried her own supplies. Didn't ask where the mop was. Didn't ask about the boy. She just got to work. Anthony noticed her once that first day, quietly wiping down the fridge, humming something he didn't recognize. Gospel, maybe. Soft, low, barely there. He didn't speak to her. Didn't need to. She wasn't here to talk. She didn't move fast, but she was steady. Every room she finished felt calmer somehow. Less sharp, less empty. Adrian didn't react to her, but he didn't run from her either, and that was something. The first time Anthony saw his son near her, it caught him off guard. He came down the stairs one morning and saw Adrian standing in the hallway, not hiding, Not crying, just standing there, watching her dust a bookshelf. Regina didn't turn around. She didn't speak. She kept moving, slow and quiet, like she didn't even know he was there. Anthony stood still, afraid to breathe too loud. Adrian just watched. Then, after a minute, walked away. No screaming, no panic. Just walked away. It was the smallest thing, but Anthony felt something shift in his chest. He didn't say anything to Regina about it. He wasn't ready to believe it meant something. But he noticed that afternoon. She left a small stuffed monkey near Adrian's corner by the window. Didn't ask, didn't explain, just placed it gently on the carpet. Anthony didn't touch it. But the next morning, when he passed by on the way to his office, it was gone, and Adrian was sitting by the window, holding it. The house didn't change overnight. Adrian didn't suddenly talk or laugh or jump into anyone's arms. But the rooms didn't feel as cold. The air didn't feel so stuck. And for the first time in a long time, Anthony didn't feel like he was the only one, trying. He never asked Regina about her past, didn't ask why she came, didn't even know where she lived. She came in the morning, she left in the evening. No questions, no drama, no sound. Just that same quiet presence, and the sound of a child slowly turning toward the world again. Anthony still couldn't name what was happening. Didn't know if it was real or if it would last. But deep down, something whispered to him. Don't move too fast. Don't speak too soon. Just watch. Because maybe, just maybe, something holy was beginning. No one told Adrian a new housekeeper was coming. Anthony didn't think it mattered. He barely spoke to her himself. The agency had sent her name and a start date. That was it. No long resume. No smiling profile photo. Just Regina Wilson, 28, quiet, reliable. That morning, she showed up 10 minutes early. The cook let her in. Anthony didn't go to the door. He stayed in his home office, drinking coffee that had gone cold. He wasn't expecting much. Every new staff member came in with the same pattern. Nervous the first day, hopeful the second, overwhelmed by the third, gone by the fifth. So when Regina walked in quietly, took off her jacket, and asked for a broom, he barely looked up. She didn't ask about Adrian, didn't ask for a tour, just asked where the mop was and what time dinner usually wrapped up. There was something still about her. Not stiff, not cold, just still. She moved like someone who had learned not to take up too much space. Not out of fear, but because it was safer that way. She didn't wear perfume. She didn't wear earbuds. And she didn't speak unless spoken to. The first day, she cleaned the kitchen with slow, quiet motions, like someone wiping down more than just surfaces. She hummed once, soft and low, while rinsing a pan. Anthony couldn't place the tune. It wasn't modern. It wasn't loud. It sounded like something from childhood, something handed down. Adrian didn't react to her that day, but she noticed him. She didn't stare. She didn't crouch down or call his name like the others did. She just let him be. He passed by once, while she was wiping the baseboards. She kept working. Didn't look up. Didn't try to connect. But she noticed him watching her from behind the curtain. That night, after Regina left, Anthony found something unusual. A small stuffed monkey, old, worn, and missing an ear, was sitting near the spot where Adrian always sat by the window. That toy had been boxed away months ago. No one had touched it since. He didn't ask the staff about it. He didn't say anything the next morning. But by the time Regina returned, the monkey was in Adrian's lap. She didn't say a word about it. She just smiled, very softly, and went back to folding laundry. Over the next few days, small things kept happening. Regina placed a fresh cup of milk in the corner of the hallway near Adrian's usual spot. Nobody told her he liked it warm. Nobody told her he never drank it. But the next morning, the cup was empty. She didn't ask about it. She didn't celebrate. She just left another one the next day. And the next. Anthony began noticing how quiet the house felt. Not empty, just less tense. Staff didn't walk on eggshells. There were fewer slamming doors, fewer whispered apologies. He didn't want to say it out loud, not even to himself, but it was easier to breathe when Regina was there. Not because she fixed anything, not because she made grand gestures, but because she didn't try to be anything but present. She didn't avoid Adrian. She didn't chase him either. She just noticed, like the way his fingers twitched when certain fabrics brushed his skin, or how he only sat near windows in the afternoon, not the morning, or how he always avoided the red crayon. She never asked Anthony about him, but she watched, and she listened, and something about that felt like grace. One evening, Anthony passed by the living room. Regina was sitting on the floor, folding clean towels into neat stacks. Adrian was a few feet away, facing the wall, rocking gently, holding his stuffed monkey. Neither of them said a word, but they were in the same room, breathing the same air, not afraid of each other. And for some reason, that image stayed with Anthony the rest of the night. He still didn't know who Regina Wilson was, where she came from, what her past looked like, but there was something about her he couldn't explain. She wasn't a therapist. She wasn't trained. She wasn't trying to prove anything. But something about the way she noticed the world made it feel less broken. And somehow, without trying, she was beginning to reach the one soul Anthony had spent 2 years failing to reach. Adrian didn't start talking. He didn't run into anyone's arms or laugh out loud. But he began showing up. That was the first sign. He started appearing in doorways. Not close, just near. Watching Regina as she worked. She never called out to him. Never tried to bring him in. She just did her tasks like usual, folding, sweeping, wiping down the tables. But she saw him. Sometimes it was just his eyes behind a curtain. Sometimes his feet just visible around a corner. And she let him stay hidden. She never made it about him. But she always kept the room quiet. Always moved a little slower when he was near. Always hummed that same soft tune like a memory carried on the edge of her breath. One afternoon, she was wiping the kitchen counter when she noticed Adrian's cup of milk hadn't been touched. She didn't throw it out. She warmed it again, poured it into a clean cup, and set it by the wall where he usually sat with his monkey. She didn't look back. Didn't wait to see what happened. She just went back to wiping crumbs from the sink. A few minutes later, she walked past again. The cup was gone, and the monkey had been placed beside it. Like a thank you, without words. Anthony had started paying attention more, too. He never said anything, but he began lingering near the rooms where Regina worked. Not to monitor, not to intrude, just to see what she saw. One morning, he paused by the staircase and watched Adrian sitting on the floor just outside the laundry room. Regina was folding towels, quiet, focused. Adrian was near the doorway. Not inside the room, not watching her directly, but close. The boy wasn't rocking, wasn't covering his ears, wasn't crying, just sitting, still, present. Anthony hadn't seen that in months. Later that week, Regina was mopping the hallway. She paused at a spot where Adrian had been standing earlier. A red crayon was lying on the floor. She picked it up, looked at it, and placed it gently on the windowsill, away from the others. Anthony noticed. He remembered what the last therapist had said. That Adrian hated red. That it might be linked to the memory of Julia's dress that day. The color of the ambulance lights. Regina hadn't been told any of that, but she noticed. She knew. And that's when Anthony started wondering, who is this woman? One morning, Anthony came downstairs early. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel heavy. He walked into the living room, half expecting to be alone. But there they were. Regina sat on the carpet, folding pillowcases. Adrian was sitting just a few feet away, closer than before. He wasn't looking at her, but he wasn't turning away either. His monkey sat in his lap. He gently patted its head, then looked up just for a second and glanced toward Regina. She didn't react. She didn't smile, didn't reach out. She just hummed, soft and steady, like a prayer no one had taught her, but she'd always known. That evening, after the staff left, Anthony stood by the kitchen window and watched the sun go down. He couldn't explain what he was feeling. It wasn't hope. Not quite. Hope had been too quiet for too long. But it was something. Something like stillness. Something like not fighting anymore. He thought of all the people who had walked through that door before Regina. All the degrees, all the promises, all the plans. None of them stayed. But this woman, who said almost nothing, who came with no credentials, was slowly rebuilding a bridge no one else had been able to touch. And she was doing it, without touching anything at all. Anthony wasn't supposed to be home that early. Meetings had been cancelled. He didn't call ahead, didn't tell anyone he was coming back. He pulled into the driveway out of habit, not intention. The house looked the same as always, still, private, untouched. But something in him felt different, like something quiet had been waiting. He stepped inside and noticed it right away. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, warm, even. No crying, no echo. Just a hush that felt settled. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel like it was holding its breath. He set his keys down and walked toward the living room. That's when he saw it. Regina was lying on the floor. Not in distress, not asleep, just still. Her yellow gloves were still on. A red cleaning bucket sat a few feet away. A dish towel laid neatly across her lap. And next to her, Adrian, sitting cross-legged, his head slightly tilted, holding a plastic stethoscope in his small hands. He placed it gently against Regina's chest, watched it, then touched it again. He was calm. He was focused. Then, without looking up, Adrian whispered, "You're okay, Mommy." Anthony stopped breathing. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there, frozen in the doorway, watching something he couldn't explain. Something no therapist, no doctor, no program had ever been able to do. Adrian had spoken. After 2 years of silence, after thousands of dollars spent on treatments, after sleepless nights and unanswered prayers, his son had spoken. Not to him. Not during a session. Not in response to flashcards or routines. But here on the living room floor, to a woman he barely knew. Anthony felt everything at once. Relief. Grief. Shock. Jealousy. Yes, jealousy. Because that word, Mummy, was meant for someone else. It wasn't supposed to be hers. It wasn't supposed to come out like that, so natural, so soft, so real. It should have been said in a moment he could share. In a space he had created. Not like this. Not without him. He turned away before they could see him. His eyes burned, his chest ached. He walked back to his office like he was moving through water. And then, for the first time in over a year, Anthony Scott, a man known for never breaking, sat down behind his desk and wept. He didn't know how to feel. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't stop seeing the image. Adrian, pressing the toy stethoscope to Regina's chest, whispering the word that had been locked away since Julia's death. There was something holy about it, but also something that hurt more than anything he'd ever felt. That night, he stayed up, staring at the baby monitor screen. Adrian was asleep, curled up with the stuffed monkey. Breathing slow, peaceful. Anthony didn't sleep. His thoughts kept circling one question he couldn't shake. Why her? Why not the experts? Why not the programs, the schools, the cutting-edge therapies? Why this quiet woman who said almost nothing and never promised anything? Why did Adrian trust her? Why did he speak to her? Why, Mummy? The next morning, Regina arrived as usual. On time, calm, quiet. Anthony watched her move through the house. She didn't bring it up. She didn't act different. She just got to work. And Adrian? He followed her. Not close, not touching, but near. He carried his monkey and watched her as she folded towels. He didn't speak again. But the silence between them felt alive. Anthony wanted to ask her something. Anything. But every time he opened his mouth, the words didn't come. Because deep down, he knew. He wasn't ready to hear her answer. Not yet. It started as a simple question. Anthony was sitting at his desk. The house was quiet. Adrian was upstairs with Regina, sitting on the floor again, playing with crayons, though he still didn't touch the red one. Anthony opened his laptop and clicked through unread emails. Then he paused. He typed her name. Regina Wilson. Nothing. No job history. No photos. No records from the agency that made sense. He clicked again. Then again. Still nothing. For someone who worked this well with children, with his son, there should have been something. Credentials, references, but it was blank. That's when something old in him switched back on the man who built a billion-dollar company because he didn't believe in missing details. He buzzed his head of security. "Can you run a quiet background check? On the housekeeper?" There was a pause on the other end. "You think she's a problem, sir?" Anthony hesitated. "I don't know. Just look into it." That night, Adrian wouldn't eat unless Regina handed him the spoon. He let her sit beside him while he colored. When she stood, he followed. Anthony watched all of it from a distance. Every small moment between them felt like a conversation without words. The way Adrian would glance at her, then back at the page. The way she'd hum, and he'd lean just slightly in her direction. It wasn't just comfort. It was trust. And it hurt, somehow. Because that trust wasn't his. The next afternoon, the security file landed on his desk. Anthony stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. He read it once, then again, and his chest tightened. Her name wasn't always Regina Wilson. She had changed it a few years ago, after leaving a hospital job out of state. She wasn't a maid. Not originally. She'd once worked as a pediatric caregiver until the child she was watching had a seizure and nearly died. The boy survived, but there had been an investigation. She wasn't found guilty, but she was let go. No one wanted to hire her after that. Rumors spread. Licenses revoked. Her record flagged, unofficially. That's when she disappeared, changed her name, took quiet jobs, no questions, no noise. The final page showed a court ruling. She'd lost custody of her younger brother after the incident. She never fought it. Anthony sat back in his chair. Everything in him wanted to stay calm, logical. But something deeper stirred. Not anger, conflict. Because it didn't make sense. That file was supposed to disqualify her, prove she wasn't who she claimed to be. But instead, it explained her. The stillness, the quiet, the gentleness that didn't come from training, but from living with a scar she'd learned to carry without showing. He could have fired her that night. He had the reason, the paperwork. But something in him said wait. That evening, after Adrian fell asleep, Anthony stood in the kitchen as Regina wiped down the table. "I saw your file." She didn't flinch, didn't look up, just kept wiping. "The seizure, the hospital, the custody hearing." She paused, set the cloth down, then turned. No panic, no defense. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. Not yet. He wasn't sure what he wanted. "Why didn't you tell me?" Regina looked at him really, looked at him for the first time. "Because people don't ask to hear the whole story. They just read the worst part and walk away." Anthony didn't say anything. She waited. "I didn't harm that child," she said. "It wasn't my fault, but that didn't matter. When the boy got sick, I was the one standing there, and that was enough." Her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't cold, either. It was the voice of someone who had already accepted what the world believed about her and chose to keep going anyway. "What about your brother?" Regina looked down. "He was 12, I was 19, I was all he had. But after the case, they split us. He was adopted by another family. I wasn't allowed to see him. He sent me a letter once, but I never wrote back. I didn't want him to grow up ashamed of me." Anthony stared at her. "You think Adrian's going to be ashamed of you?" Regina blinked. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "No, I think he already sees me, for who I really am," and he stayed. She picked up the cloth again. "But if you want me to go, I'll go." Anthony didn't answer, because he couldn't. Not yet. He just watched her finish wiping down the table, then quietly walk out of the room. And somewhere, in the stillness, he felt something begin to break open. But it wasn't her. It was him. It happened on a Thursday. Nothing about the day felt unusual until the doorbell rang. Most people didn't ring at this house. Staff came through the side. Deliveries were left at the gate. So, when Anthony opened the front door and saw two people standing there, badges around their necks, folders in their hands, he already knew it wasn't good. "We're with Child Protective Services," the woman said gently. "We received a report. We need to speak with you." They sat at the dining table. Anthony tried to stay calm, tried not to show his confusion or his rising anger. The woman opened her folder. "The report says a non-certified adult is acting in a caretaking capacity for your son." He didn't answer. "It also mentions a prior record under another name. Employment history, an unresolved case involving a child." Still, he said nothing. "Is there a Regina Wilson currently living or working in this household?" He nodded once. "She's our housekeeper." "Has she had unsupervised contact with your son?" That question stuck in the air, like something too heavy to move. He looked out the window. He could see Adrian sitting in the yard, his stuffed monkey in his lap. Regina was across from him, slowly picking up leaves one by one and handing them to him without speaking. And Adrian, his son, who once screamed at wind, at color, at closeness, was reaching out, taking each one from her hand. No words, no instruction, just presence. Anthony turned back to the caseworker. "She's the only one he lets near him." The woman looked down, took a few notes. "I understand that, but due to the history on her record, we're going to have to open a formal inquiry. And until that's resolved, she'll need to be removed from the home, temporarily." He didn't speak. Couldn't. The man beside her closed the folder gently. "We know this is hard, but this is protocol." Regina didn't cry when he told her. She didn't plead, didn't ask who called. But Anthony could see it right behind her eyes. The ache of being pulled out again. Of being told her presence was too much, or not enough. She walked upstairs to gather her things. Anthony stood in the hallway, unsure of what to do with his hands. He felt helpless. Small, like the floor had dropped out from under the fragile piece they'd just begun to build. Adrian was in his room when she went in to say goodbye. She didn't speak to him like a therapist. She didn't give a speech or explain what was happening. She just sat beside him on the floor, held out her palm. He placed the monkey in it, then looked at her, really looked, and the moment shattered. "Mummy," he whispered. Not playfully, not pretending, but like someone naming something real. Anthony stood in the hallway, holding back tears. He heard the sound that came next. A low, heartbreaking wail from his son. The kind of cry that comes from somewhere deep, where language doesn't reach. Adrian was screaming, kicking, clawing at the walls. And Regina didn't move. She just whispered through the noise. "You're okay. I stayed. But the car was waiting outside. Regina came downstairs slowly, her bag over her shoulder. She didn't look at Anthony, not because she was angry, but because looking at him might break her. He stepped in front of the door. "I can stop this. I can fight it." Her voice was almost too soft to hear. "You can't fight what people don't want to understand. They won't see what's real. They'll only see my record." He looked at her, really looked. For the first time, not as a staff member, but as someone who had saved his son's heart. "You're not what they say you are." "Neither is he," she said, quietly. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the monkey, placed it in Anthony's hands. "Please don't let him forget I stayed." And then she left. No drama, no goodbye, just a door closing behind her. That night the house wasn't quiet. It was loud with pain. Adrian screamed for hours. Not words, not tantrums, just raw, empty cries that had no shape, only hurt. Anthony tried to hold him, but he was pushed away. He tried to sing, to hum what she used to hum, but Adrian covered his ears, and Anthony sat there on the floor, holding a stuffed monkey, and realizing he hadn't just lost a housekeeper, He'd lost the only person his son had ever trusted. The house felt different now. Not empty. Not loud. Just wrong. There was food in the fridge, dishes put away, towels folded. Everything looked fine. But nothing was. Adrian stopped sleeping through the night. He wouldn't stay in his room. Wouldn't let anyone dress him. Wouldn't eat unless it was one brand of crackers, broken into 4 exact pieces. He cried more. But not like before. This was deeper. Not tantrums. Not fear. It was loss. A kind of pain Anthony didn't know how to reach. Every time Adrian passed the corner where Regina used to leave his milk, he paused, looked, waited. And every time, there was nothing there. Anthony tried to fill the space. He cancelled work, stayed home, sat beside Adrian when he colored, tried to hum that soft tune she always used. But it wasn't the same. The boy didn't move toward him, didn't push him away, either. He just sat in silence. Somewhere far. Somewhere Anthony couldn't go. Days passed like that. Anthony kept watching the door, like maybe she'd return. No one did. Not the agency. Not the staff. Not the people who said they'd help. They came for the report, the questions, the removal. But not for the child they claimed to protect. One night, Anthony stood in the kitchen long after Adrian had fallen asleep on the couch. The monkey was still in his arms. The house was still, the kind of still that hurts more than noise. And he asked the question out loud, quiet, but clear. God, what am I supposed to do now? No answer. No signs. Just stillness. But something stirred in him. Not rage. Not desperation. Resolve. The next morning, he made 2 phone calls. One to his lawyer. One to the private investigator he used during corporate buyouts. I want everything, he said. I want to know what really happened to her. I want to know who lied and why. 2 days later, the first folder landed on his desk. It wasn't long, but it was heavy. Regina had been working at a children's clinic in North Carolina when the incident happened. The child had a rare seizure disorder, undiagnosed, unpredictable. Regina had followed protocol, called for help, stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. But the hospital didn't want press, didn't want questions, so they gave the family a quiet settlement and blamed the caregiver. She was let go the next day. No hearing, no defense, no second chance. Her license was quietly flagged. She was told not to speak to the media. One nurse had tried to stand up for her, wrote a letter. It was ignored. And then Anthony saw it. A voicemail, buried in a phone record the investigator had recovered. It was from the clinic's administrator. If she talks, we'll bury her again. She's lucky she's walking free. Anthony sat there, stunned. All that pain, all that shame, all that silence she had carried wasn't hers to carry. He could still see her eyes the night she left, still hear her voice. They won't see what's real. But he had. He saw his son speak. He saw his son laugh. He saw something break open that no doctor, no dollar, no program had ever touched. That evening, Adrian had a meltdown, the worst one since Regina left. He screamed until his voice cracked, threw his crayons, tore a photo off the wall. Anthony held him anyway, not to fix it, just to stay. Adrian clawed at his chest, frantic, breathless. "Bring her back," he sobbed. "Mommy, please bring her back." Anthony's body broke into 100 quiet pieces. He rocked him gently, arms tight, eyes full. "I will," he whispered. "I promise you, I will." And for the first time in his life, Anthony Scott didn't care what the world said was allowed. He had seen the truth. Now he was going to fight for it. He didn't tell anyone at first. No announcements. No press. Just one quiet decision made in a corner of his office with the monkey still sitting on the shelf behind him. Anthony read the file again. Not as a businessman. Not as a father. But as a man who had once begged God for help and didn't recognize the answer when it came through the back door. Now he did. And he was ready. His lawyer said it wouldn't be easy. Reversing a formal CPS action required proof, documents, testimony, time. But Anthony didn't blink. Do it anyway. He handed them everything. The hospital report, the flagged voicemail, the list of therapists who had come and gone, and a video. Not a dramatic one, just a quiet clip from the baby monitor the day Anthony had come home early. Adrian, toy stethoscope. Regina, still and stiller. And that voice. "You're okay, Mummy." Word started to spread. Not on headlines, not in blogs, but between people. The nurse who had written the ignored letter years ago came forward. A former hospital volunteer. A mother from a support group. Each one had a story. Each one had seen how Regina showed up in silence and stayed when others walked away. And slowly, the picture began to change. The hearing was scheduled on a Tuesday morning. Regina showed up in a plain blue dress, hair tied back, no makeup. She sat quietly in the back until her name was called. Anthony sat beside her. Adrian stayed home with a trusted sitter, crayons, and a monkey in his lap. They asked Anthony to speak. He didn't use a script. Didn't quote statistics. Didn't try to sound impressive. He just told the truth. My son didn't speak for 2 years, not a word. We had the best doctors, the best programs, the best people money could buy. None of them reached him. But she did. She didn't use charts or techniques. She didn't promise results. She just showed up, every day, quiet, present. And one afternoon I came home early, and I saw something I'll never forget. My son spoke. He looked at her, put a toy on her chest and said, "You're okay, Mummy. I've built companies that have touched the world, but nothing has touched my son's heart until her. I don't care what a file says. I don't care who made a mistake years ago. I saw what was real. And what's real is that my son knows who saved him." When he sat down, the room was silent. Regina didn't cry. But something in her eyes softened like a weight she'd been carrying quietly had finally been named out loud. By the end of the week, the inquiry was closed. Her record was cleared. The case was dismissed. And one quiet morning, without announcement or warning, Regina returned to the house. Adrian was sitting near the living room window when the door opened. He didn't look up at first, but then he heard the sound. That same soft hum, low, gentle, familiar. He turned. His eyes widened. He stood. And then he ran. Straight into her arms. Monkey pressed between them. No words. Just a moment that no one dared to interrupt. Anthony stood back. He didn't move. Didn't try to own the moment. Just watched. And in that silence, something healed. Not everything. Not overnight. But something. Regina never asked what Anthony said at the hearing. She didn't need to. And Anthony never asked what she prayed in those years of being unseen. He already knew the answer. It was in the way she folded towels. The way she left warm milk without asking. The way she let silence become safety, not shame. Later that night, Regina sat on the rug. Adrian lay beside her, coloring. Anthony sat near the edge of the couch, close, but not too close. And for the first time, the house felt like more than walls and light switches. It felt like a home. The house didn't change overnight. There were still hard days. Mornings when Adrian wouldn't eat. Nights when thunder made him crawl under the table and cover his ears. But the difference was, they weren't alone anymore. Regina came back the same way she left, quietly. No announcement. No celebration. She unpacked her things in the small room near the laundry, hung her plain clothes in the closet, washed her hands, started a load of towels, and just like that, she was home. Adrian stayed near her almost every day now. He didn't talk much, but his eyes were alive. He followed her from room to room with a crayon in one hand and his monkey in the other. Sometimes he would press the toy stethoscope to her chest, just like before. He never said the word again. But he didn't need to. They both remembered. Anthony watched it all unfold from a different place inside himself. A quieter place. He'd stopped trying to control everything. stopped needing to know the next 5 steps. He was learning how to just sit and stay. He and Regina didn't speak about the past often. There were no long conversations, no drawn-out apologies. But there were shared looks, quiet understandings, moments when their eyes met over Adrian's head and nothing needed to be said. One afternoon, Adrian did something small. He walked into Anthony's office. Didn't knock, didn't run, just walked in, stood beside the chair, climbed up onto his lap, and stayed. Anthony didn't speak, didn't move. He just closed his laptop, wrapped his arms gently around his boy, and in the stillness of that moment, he realized. The silence had never been a wall. It had been a waiting room. A few months later, Anthony made a quiet decision. He used his resources to start something called the Adrian Project, a non-profit offering in-home support for children with communication disorders. No big launch, no red carpet, just real help, offered in quiet homes like his used to be. He asked Regina to be the first director. She said no at first. "I don't want to be the face of anything," she said. "I just want to keep showing up." But he insisted. "That's exactly why you're the right person." So she agreed. On one condition. "We don't fix kids," she said. "We meet them." The house felt different now. Not because of new paint or new staff, but because there was laughter. Not loud, not wild, but real. Adrian had started to read, one word at a time. He still hated loud noises, still didn't like crowds. But he laughed when the monkey fell off the table. He painted sunrises with soft colors. He whispered, "I love you," to Regina before bed. He called her Miss G. She never corrected him. Every Friday afternoon, Adrian brought the toy stethoscope into the living room. Regina would lie back on the rug, arms by her sides, and he'd press the little plastic piece to her chest. Every time he smiled, every time it mattered. Anthony sometimes watched from the stairs. No phone in hand, no deadlines waiting. Just his son, breathing, laughing, present. There were no big endings, no final breakthroughs. Just the quiet beauty of something broken, becoming whole in its own way. On a cool evening in early spring, Adrian crawled into Regina's lap during story time. The book slid from her hand. He looked up at her, toy monkey tucked under his arm. "You're okay," he whispered. She blinked, pressed a hand to his cheek. "So are you," she said. Anthony walked past the door just then, paused. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak. He just smiled. The kind of smile that holds gratitude too deep for words. Because he knew. This wasn't the house it used to be. It didn't echo with silence anymore. It didn't ache with unanswered prayers. Now, it breathed. Softly, steadily, together.